Now, one thing I did not mention in the last video about this is a little bit of a history on this tank itself. It is obviously French in origin, and the Germans had tremendous issues against B1 tanks. That's what this is. The B1 tank, the French B1. Let's go back to tech tree here, and you can see what I'm talking about. Here's the B1. Preview the vehicle. I mean, it's just minorly different. Just minor things are different. Still a kick-ass tank. Now, the B2 here, the Germans, when they went against France to take it over during World War II, they ran into this tank and they were like, oh shit, what do we do? Because the armaments they had were inferior to penetrating this tank. I mean, there was the Panzer IIs just bounced all day long on the armor. It was too thick, too sloped. This tank was a monster to Panzer IIs. Panzer IIIs, oh god, even more so. Panzer IIIs couldn't take it out. Even the Panzer IVs with the 75mm gun had issues going through this thing. This thing is the epitome of a heavy tank. It looks strange, it looks odd, but the armor actually worked on the B1. And the Germans were extremely impressed with this tank. So much so that they actually took over, once they took over France, they kept the B1, modified it to the B2, and just kept it. They were just that impressed with what it was. They had a healthy respect for this tank because of the troubles they had fighting it. They eventually figured out, with tactics, obviously, how to get past it and whatnot. The only thing that was really going through it, even the Pak 36, which eventually became obsolete and caught the name Door Knocker, because literally, when it would shoot something, it would hit the tank and just bounce right off, because armor was getting that much better than what this anti-tank gun was capable of dealing with. But even the only thing that could kill the thing with surety, with 100% surety, was the 88. They would take the 88 that was shooting down planes, just angle it down towards the tank, pull the trigger, dead tank. That simple. But more on the 88 history in a little bit. Anyway, more about this tank. There was I believe, captain, I want to say, I think his name was Pierre Bedouet or something along that line. I probably am botching the guy's name. I do apologize. My French is non-existent. But this guy, he was amazing. He was an amazing tanker in this tank. I mean, wow, this guy was good. He knew what he was doing. He got amazing stuff done. His stats were, he killed something along the lines of 13 German tanks, 11 Panzer IIIs, 2 Panzer IVs, a pair of those 37 anti-tank guns, which I was just saying, the Door Knockers, and the amazing thing on the armor itself is that during this entire time, his tank took 140 shells from various directions and whatnot from tanks, anti-tank rounds. That's 140 shots this thing ate, and not one shot went through. If that doesn't just amaze you on the armor of this, it's, I don't know what will. At this point, it was amazing, amazing, amazing tank the B1 was. And a lot of people tend to look at these French tanks with, oh, it's a French tank, it sucks. And no. The French tanks did not suck. They may have been, some of them may have been a little underclassed for the German army, but when they had the B1 over here, this thing was, as I just given you known facts, well, I should say not often known to many people in World of Tanks, this thing eats lead like it eats M&Ms. Like you and I eat M&Ms. I love M&Ms. This thing eats lead from these tanks like that. But here in World of Tanks, that would be unfair. So they figured out, well, it's going to have good armor, really good. I mean, we got to give some credit to the French for this. I mean, come on. So, what are the weak points to the tank in World of Tanks itself? Right here. This huge viewport. Put a shot in, that's it. Next spot. This huge commander's hatch right here. Shoot that, it's going down. Next spot, right here in the engine. Typical tank weakness, right in the engine. All armor in the front, none in the back. But, again, the side armor over here, I believe this is spaced armor. So that'll help with artillery blasts hitting you on the side, and maybe some AHE rounds. But most tanks have issues, especially seeing that this tank only sees tier 4 matches and below. Most tanks can't deal with this tank. They have to spam APCR. And I have been shot plenty of times in APCR rounds into this tank, and they still bounced. OP as hell is this armor. But there's always a but. The gun just fails miserably on this tank. It is fast firing, yes, but it's just awful. Look at standard shell damage of 39 to 65. I think I've hit 65 4 times with this tank. That's it. I have a video up on my channel where I ran into a Panzer 38T, I think, or 30. I think it was a 38T, if I remember right. And I just spanked that player. I spanked him to next year. I'm like, oh, you shooting me? He managed to get through. He hit a weak point. I give him credit. He knew where to shoot. Congratulations to that player. You knew. But what I did to him, I made him pay. I put round after round to this guy. I even drove him off a small embankment, knocked him down, and then drove over his ass. He was dead, to say the least. And at that point, I started receiving hits from all over. And then the tanks that were just shooting me at this point were just had a high, better caliber. The tank can be penetrated. I'm not trying to make this sound like a super fortress. It can be penetrated. And it can die relatively quick. But the biggest weakness thing is the gun. The gun does not and cannot compare to what it can face. I mean, it's just bad. See, tier 3s, it's okay at tier 3, but when you start in tier 4, some of the tanks you're facing, it can't do anything to them. An example of this is the DW2. Now, in my last video, I mentioned how crap that tank was. I have literally had issues fighting DW2s, and I have died from DW2s in this tank because the gun cannot deal enough damage or pen. Other tanks, Matildas, will eat this thing alive. And there's not much you can do against a Matilda because the gun is just so insignificant. You can load APCR. I have 10 rounds loaded in mine right here. It's just not good enough. It's just not good enough to deal with that, or the DW2. Another tank that's notoriously hard to fight in this tank, I have found, is the premium, I think it's Russian, the Valentine 2, obviously from the Lend-Lease effort there. Horrible time against that tank. Horrible. Suggestions, if you want to equip anything on here, vents, you can, but remember, this is a springboard, if you must. A springboard for other tanks. Heavy tanks. You train the crew in this crew goes into another heavy tank. Get a new crew in, zip that one right out. You can crew train pretty quick in this, and that's awesome. That's one of the best things about this. Now, how often do you see this thing in combat? If you play it, you will run into other B2s. Other B2s are in danger as well because a lot of other B2s know all too well how bad the tank's gun is and just instantly load in APCR and they aim for obviously the viewport here, the cupola, or the engine. Now, like I said, it's not an impervious tank, but most other tanks, like Panzer 1Cs, Panzer 4s, I've actually been damaged by Grants. I think it's a Grant, maybe. I'm trying to remember. It was no, I think it was Lee at tier 4, the American Lee. I've had damage done by that thing to me, and the gun's not good enough to punch through it. If you know the weak points of the Lee, go for it. This tank forces you to learn enemy tanks' weak points because the gun is bad. It's just bad, and that's the worst part about this. It's a bad gun. If it had a better gun, this thing would be way more enjoyable to play, but at the same time would be borderline overpowered. Borderline. Anyway, equipment, vents, definitely. Gun laying drive, gun rammer, dude, you're shooting out rounds. Look, reload time is 2.1 seconds. You get 28.8 shots off in a minute. That's friggin' lightning right there. That's what's amazing about this. If anything, just go with vents. And the option, which I might suggest, is a toolkit to repair the tracks. You get blown off on the tracks. You want to get up and going as soon as you can. I have a repair kit, a small repair kit, just in case for that matter, because Artie will go after your ass. There's no questions about it. They will hit you. You're not going to also make any land speeds over this tank. It's just really, really slow. It's not the slowest tank, but it's I mean, Christmas comes sooner before this. But that's the premium PZB2 for you. Do I suggest it? Absolutely. I'd suggest it because if you're not fighting DW2s, Matildas, Valentines, you can literally wreck the opposition. If you get into a platoon with you and another player with this tank, or platoon up with someone in the game with this tank, you can seriously impact the outcome of a match. Assuming the opposite side, the enemies you're facing, do not have one, or a platoon on there. I've had games where I've played this thing and have died from other platoons of PZB2s. And I had one match where a platoon of 3 PZB2 players were just driving around, killing and shooting. I don't know how they do this. Killing and shooting and holding a conversation at the same time in the chat box. Now, the conversation was about pleasing women and how to do it. I don't know what the hell that has to even be brought up in a tank game, but apparently they wanted to talk about it, and they just dominated. They simply just kept typing, shooting, killing. That was it. I don't know what else to say. I mean, the tank has potential. It does. And having that boost to crew training is amazing. It's really amazing. Suggest this tank? Yes, I do.